The two cases we're going to discuss next both illustrate that even if you do end up finding someone who strangely vanished, it often does very little to alleviate the mystery behind their initial disappearance. On the 10th of May 2019, 53-year-old Sandile Sabir was helping a neighbour of his in a suburb of the South African city of Durban. Being in the construction trade, Sandile was more than happy to help out with his neighbour's home renovations. Sadly, he was oblivious to the fact that by volunteering his services that day, he was effectively signing his own death warrant. Tragedy struck when part of a wall collapsed on Sandile, snapping his thigh bone like a twig. This bone, also known as the femur, is the strongest bone in the body and is considered by many to be the most painful break you can experience. His family swiftly transported him to the closest hospital, Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital, where he was assessed and treated. Although it was serious, and would take months for him to rehabilitate fully, it was not a life-threatening injury. During his recovery, he was set to be transported to Addington Hospital, where he would get ongoing support and rehabilitation from an orthopedic specialist. Before this could happen, Sandile vanished without a word to anyone and without anyone seeing him leave. Although it's not uncommon for people to go AWOL or self-discharge from hospitals every now and then, Sandile's disappearance seemed particularly unusual. He had just undergone surgery for quite a serious break. He would have been highly immobile and in a lot of pain if he tried to move around much on his own. Despite thorough searches throughout the entire hospital, Sandile was nowhere to be found. With no luck and no clues as to what happened to their patient, he was reported as a missing person to the local police department. Nearly 2 weeks later, staff began to complain of an unbearable stench wafting around the hospital. On May 25th, they managed to track down where the awful smell was coming from. A storeroom was opened and the stench grew stronger. A strange dark liquid dripped from the ceiling. Upon closer inspection, the remains of Sandile's body was discovered in the space above the ceiling. As you can imagine, there was a bit of a media frenzy when word got out about a missing patient who was found deceased in the hospital ceiling. Nomagugu Simelane Zulu, a newly appointed official for the local health department, released statements promising to investigate the case. She also said, "We will not hesitate to take the strongest possible action should anyone be found guilty of any form of wrongdoing." Apart from being both a tragedy and a bizarre thing to happen to a person, there was another reason why the media caused such a frenzy, and the story hit so hard. This was not the first time something like this had happened. A very similar case had taken place less than 2 years prior, in Stellenbosch Hospital, located hundreds of miles away in South Africa's Western Cape province. 61-year-old father of 6, Teteteke Gotsi, had been admitted to the hospital on October 5, 2017, to undergo abdominal surgery. A couple of days later, his family received a phone call asking if Mr. Gotsi had returned home, to which they replied no, he's still at the hospital. The lady on the phone explained that she was calling from the hospital and that he was no longer there. The family rushed immediately to the hospital, where staff informed them that he had last been seen at 5:15 a.m. by a nurse who went to go and fetch some bed linen. When she returned with the linen, Mr. Gotsi was gone. The family searched the hospital, both inside and out, but to no avail. They came back the following day with the local police and searched high and low, but ultimately their search was in vain. 13 days later, a construction worker made a shocking discovery while doing renovations in an isolated and cut-off section of the hospital. Mr. Gotzi's decomposing body was found in the ceiling, with no obvious way he could have got up there. In both Mr. Gotzi's 2017 case and Mr. Sabia's 2019 case, there doesn't seem to have been any thorough investigation or explanation as to how they lost their lives, or indeed how they ended up in the ceiling. Family members were understandably frustrated by both the hospital's failure to provide clear information and to take responsibility, as they had expected their relatives would receive proper care at these facilities. In an interview with the press, Christmas Kethwane, brother of Teteteki, told Cape News that he felt left in the dark and that the family was losing hope of getting answers from law enforcement. Police stated that the autopsy findings indicated death by natural causes. Teteteki's daughter said that the investigation appeared to stall, and she was informed that no other action could be taken. On May 29, 2019, Times Live reported that Mr. Sabia's family had been contacted by the local health department regarding post-mortem examination results from forensic pathology services. A follow-up report was anticipated soon after, but no details of Sandil's post-mortem examination seemed to be published or discussed online, and despite promises of a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances surrounding Mr. Sabia's death, nothing seems to have been forthcoming. Regarding Mr. Gotzi's case, as previously mentioned, the autopsy results that the police released stated that he had died from natural causes. No further details seem to be available as to how they came to this conclusion, or what those natural causes were. Interestingly, these findings are in stark contrast to what hospital management told Mr. Gotzi's brother, as reported in the Cape News newspaper. They said it was clear that my brother did not die as a result of natural causes. He died as a result of something and was placed where he was found. The article also makes it clear that Mr. Gotzi was found in an area of the hospital he could not have accessed by himself, leaving the hospital management puzzled. Naturally, both families suspected foul play or negligence, but reading between the lines, it seems like some people were suggesting that somehow these men were responsible for putting themselves in the position that they were eventually found in. Could they really have been capable of such a feat? Were they trying to escape from some real or imagined threat? Could something unbelievable have happened? Being such strange and unexplained cases with no clear motive or cause has obviously drawn a lot of speculation from people around the world. The most out there theory we came across was the idea of spontaneous teleportation, where the poor gentleman would have supposedly teleported to where they were found and either died in the process or from being stuck without food and water for so long. It's also been speculated by some that perhaps these men were the victims of voodoo or curses. I have to say, while researching about this case, my mind wandered to plots of horror stories where people become cursed or possessed and act in bizarre ways, often doing horrific things to themselves or others. The two movies Smile and The Empty Man spring immediately to mind. This was no doubt spurred on by the memory of a video I saw online years ago. I'm sure some of you may have seen it. The footage of Eliza Lamb acting unusually in an elevator, and then the fact that she went missing after the footage was taken. She was found weeks later in a water tank on the roof. Some people believe that she was possessed or that she was being pursued by an evil entity, while others believe such ideas belong in works of fiction. As for Mr. Gotzi and Mr. Sabia's situation, far more grounded in reality is the theory that perhaps these men had some kind of rare side effects from medications they were given, leading to paranoia and hallucinations. There's also a condition known as post-operative delirium, where people wake up from anesthesia and suffer a temporary psychosis which can be severe. A fairly high-profile case of this took place in January 2014, when socialite and philanthropist Sandra de Auriol underwent a cosmetic procedure. The following morning she awoke agitated, stripped off naked, and ran up to the roof of the clinic, where she ultimately leapt to her death. The problem with this explanation for the disappearances of Sandil Sabir and Teteke Gotsi is probably quite obvious. Both men had undergone serious surgery, and their mobility and strength would have been severely lacking. It would have been nearly impossible to navigate the distances they did, and then find some way to hoist themselves up into the ceiling. And how would they have done so without causing any damage to the ceiling tiles or leaving any traces of any disturbances? For these reasons, it seems highly improbable that the two gentlemen had placed themselves in the ceiling. This leads us to the next troubling theory. The idea that the men had been victims of negligence and had died because of something a staff member at the hospital did or did not do, like administering the wrong medication, or not administering medication when necessary, or maybe even botched surgery or some other kind of medical mishap. But the idea that both men had died accidentally by neglect or malpractice seems less likely to me. Why would multiple hospital workers risk being caught covering up the death? One person, sure, they may want to protect their career or their reputation or whatever. But how would they talk others into conspiring with them? And yes, I say multiple hospital workers because it would have taken at least 2 strong people, probably more, to hoist the dead weight of a fully grown man up into the space above the ceiling. Then there would have been the logistics of transporting them from the ward they were on or the room they were in, without being noticed or raising suspicion. Also, it's an unfortunate truth that mistakes and accidents do sometimes happen in hospitals around the world. The conspiracy theory seems pretty extreme and bizarre lengths to be taking to avoid what would ultimately be not much more than a slap on the wrist and a fine for the hospital. Finally, the most disturbing theory of all is the idea that these men had their lives taken on purpose. As it's clear to see, these 2 separate cases are eerily similar to each other. Both patients were older males, admitted to hospital with severely impaired mobility, and they were both found approximately 2 weeks later in the ceilings of the hospitals they went missing in. This has led people to speculate that it was the same killer responsible for both cases. Maybe a rogue health worker or even a janitor or cleaner. Someone who had gotten away with it before and wanted to scratch that itch once more. There's also the possibility that it was a copycat crime, where one psychopath was inspired by another. The theory of a killer still has many of the flaws of an accidental death cover-up though. One person on their own would face all the logistical problems, and of course the impossibility of being able to lift the dead weight on their own, and so carefully, so precisely, as to not damage those flimsy ceiling tiles seen in the picture. I find it really unsettling that no one seems to have offered a reasonable explanation as to how these poor men ended up in the ceiling. And the fact that the autopsy results stated natural causes as the reason for the death of both men only deepens the mystery. Honestly, this one really has me stumped.